quickly review the goals of today, and then we're going to jump in pretty quickly to a presentation. So today we've invited members of the DCP team who's going to share a short presentation in regards to the possibilities of planning and design on the site and the building. Following that presentation, we're going to take some time to really get into a discussion in regards to the planning and urban design. We've talked a lot in a lot of these different meetings about different components of the building, but this is the one that will tie together a lot of the different connections that we've talked about in previous meetings. Following that discussion, we're going to take time to really look back. Go back and look at what have we talked about in these previous meetings? What are some of the themes that we've uncovered? But more importantly, how do we hope to use the public meeting as an opportunity to gather more input, to clarify some of our recommendations? So we're going to be really looking and reflecting and thinking forward about what do we want to share with the public in the upcoming workshops, and how is that going to support us build recommendations? Following that, we're going to spend a few minutes just talking about community engagement, as well as, of course, next steps. As you can see, this is our timeline. And if you believe it, we are now in April and we started in December. It feels like it was yesterday, but it's been a few weeks. And what's coming up, just as you've heard us mention a few times, is, of course, the public workshops are both coming up in May. And then there's going to be a chance in June and July. It's going to help us to kind of narrow down and build out those final set of recommendations that are added to the RFP that will be shared in the summer. To help us, and I know we've seen this a few times, but I always think it's a good reminder, is that, of course, I'm going to encourage you, feel free to use the chat box. It's a lovely tool. Fill it in, add your thoughts. I'm going to ask that you stay on mute unless you're asking a question, or if, of course, when you're in a breakout session. And thank you. You guys are always so lovely being on screen, and so we really appreciate it. It's nice to see you. In full transparency, we are recording this, as well as it is being live streamed at this moment. All the recordings, notes, and presentations, of course, are hosted afterwards on the project website. I want to share with you, as we've done in the previous meetings, a quick update from Historical Perspectives, Inc., so HPI, in regards to the ongoing research. So similar to last time, they have continued their online research in regards to references to the Flatbush African Burial Ground. As well, in this last month, they've spent a lot of time reviewing Kings County records from the municipal archives and really looking if there was additional information on the burial ground or those who were buried there. To this time and date, there has been no new information that has been uncovered, but you can see from this list of records that they are really diving in and looking at many different resources. As part of the notes that we'll share with you afterwards, there's more information about each of these different records and kind of what they were looking at within them for your own reference. Moving forward, I want to take a moment to acknowledge all of you and thank you for being part of this task force. We are a big group, and of course, everyone's been able to jump in at different times, and we're really grateful for that. As always, we will acknowledge in our notes who was able to join the meeting. For today's meeting as well, I want to acknowledge from the city team who is here with us. So we have members, as always, from EDC, from HPD, as well from LPC. But in addition today, as I've mentioned, we have two members from the Department of City Planning, so DCP, who we'll introduce in a few minutes, but they're going to be taking us through and supporting with the presentation and talking through some of our breakout sessions. So for those who are on live stream, or if this is the first time that you're seeing, of course, this is meeting number 5. So there's been a lot of discussions that have already happened. All of those notes from meeting 1 through 4 do live on the website. So I want to encourage you, especially today, if you're sitting in and listening, and it might be helpful to go back and look at that notes, as we're going to be talking through some of the insights that we've already discussed. And as mentioned, the notes from today, the presentation, and always will live on this project website. Before I hand it over to Claudia, I do want to just take a moment to talk through and just kind of review some of those guidelines for productive conversations. So I'm going to read through a few of these, and then I'm going to turn to you guys to see if there's anything that you would like to add. So firstly, I'm going to ask that you have empathy to and awareness of the unique perspectives in this virtual room. Secondly, I'm going to ask that you be conscientious and acknowledge the lens and the perspective you speak of. Where possible, speak from the I. Acknowledge if you're speaking from the perspective of your lived experience, from the lens of your organization, or from an assumption. They are all valid, and we welcome all of those perspectives. It's just helpful for us to know, where are you speaking from? Thirdly, I'm going to ask you to assume the best intentions of your fellow group members. Be mindful not to make assumptions about others and their experiences. And fourthly, I'm going to ask that we be comfortable with discomfort as we together unlearn history related to slavery in this community. And be wary of oppressive, offensive, and racialized language that may be triggering to others. With this last point, I do want to make note that today we will be talking about sensitive handling of human remains. As in previous meetings, there was a discussion about the appropriate term. Moving forward, we have decided that the city team, as well as Tithe, will be using the term human remains. But for task force members, if you feel comfortable and if you deem that it is appropriate, you are welcome to use the term ancestral remains. With that, I want to take a pause and turn to you. Does anyone have any other best practices or guidelines that we think we should keep in mind for our discussion? All right. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Claudia. And so Claudia will introduce kind of what's coming up and then we'll go from there. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Good evening, everyone. My name is Claudia Mabry. I'm a strategist with Tithe, and hello to everyone on the live stream for joining us this evening. As Chris indicated, we're going to be going through a series of different dialogues this evening to support our understanding and exploration around the planning and design of the site and the building to come, as well as revisiting kind of where we've come to this point and bringing back some of the dialogue from past meetings to inform the future development of the recommendations, as well as what we would like to bring forward to the public engagement process to come. So to kick off this discussion, I'm going to first introduce the Department of City Planning that's joined us this evening. And they're going to give us an overview of some of the possibilities for what the site plan and design could look like. And so what we're about to look at is a series of explorations. Nothing you are about to see are any final decisions in regards to building designs or layouts, but rather just an opportunity to provide you with inspiration as you kind of explore what this could look like in the context of our site for this project. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to Jesse to present to us.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Claudia and Christina. I'm going to take a moment. I'm Jesse Hirakawa. I'm going to take a moment to share my screen real quick. Here we are. Just want to take a second to verify that you see my presentation. Everything good?
Looks good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, hold on, let me orient my screen right. Okay, so yeah, thank you everyone for allowing us at your task force meeting today. And also, I'm Jesse Hirakawa. I'm an urban designer with the Department of City Planning. And on here, I also have Jonah Rogoff, which is a city planner, which you'll be able to speak a little bit later as well. And so we've been chatting a lot with EVC and HPD and Tithe, and we also even tuned into the previous live stream. And so we're very excited to be here today. And so we've done a lot of analysis and research on this area, and we're very excited to share and discuss with you all. And so the purpose and goals of this presentation is to share potential site planning and building form options, but also to discuss and gather feedback on key building considerations to help form the future conversations and the RFP. And so we'll take a look at memorial space location and configurations, open space locations, and ultimately how these work with building height and setbacks. And so when looking at a site, it's not always about just building as much as you can or taking as all the floor. There's always a thorough analysis of site conditions and context before thinking about what is even possible, right? And so first, as we all know, the site should consider this unique site should consider the boundaries of the burial grounds from the 1855 surveys, and also respecting the locations of human remains that were found during the recent 2001 archaeological testing. And so since the site sits right against Erasmus High School, the landmark building, it's important to also have the building set back away from there. In addition, not just for this site, but anytime we look at a site, it's always good to look at the existing context. Like, is the site, what is the proximity to transit? And here we are. what is the existing condition of the rest of the street? Is it a commercial corridor? Is it a residential corridor, right? What is the typical neighborhood character of the surrounding area? And from there, we can start to think, well, where would the building go, right? We have a piece of land. If we want to put a building on here, where does it go? How tall can it be, right? And so we take cues from the different surrounding contexts and to help determine these factors. And so zooming in a little bit more, I know this, and so you'll notice it's, instead of going from Google, it's now a little bit more of this kind of diagram look. And so outlined in red is the boundaries of the 2286 Church Avenue lot, right? And so we call this a corner lot because it has 2 street frontages on 2 avenues. And so we see this as an opportunity to support additional pedestrian activity. Another thing to note that lot 50 right next to it in the black dashed lines on the side, it's a smaller lot. It's not part of the site, but it's currently vacant. And also recently we checked on the Department of Building Records that there is a pending 4-story building that will be coming up. And typically like site lots are rectangles or squares, right? As we kind of look at buildings, but this is a very unique and irregular size. If you notice, it's kind of this weird, not a typical square rectangle, right? And so it makes it a little difficult to have efficient kind of buildings and residential layouts sometimes. And so we'll explore that a little bit more later. And also we'll also note that we've also just queued to understand, where are the heights of surrounding buildings, and that these avenues are 80 feet, which we consider to be a wide street. And so this is a baseline scenario of what a future development could look like without any considerations or any setbacks, right? I know I just said a lot of the considerations and setbacks, but this is one that doesn't consider any of it. And it's always important to understand what a basic building could look like before anything else, right? And so first I want to help you, we're going to be looking at some diagrams, so I'm going to try to help you understand these diagrams right away. So you notice on the left, there's kind of this beige box, right, with a bunch of lines, and those symbolize a potential building, right? And those lines address floors. So this one is actually showing a 9-story building. And quickly, you can see how this does not meet any of the considerations we just talked about. There's no open space, there's no open space there. There's no area for outdoor memorial, and it doesn't align with Erasmus, and it's kind of minimizing view. So it's always good to understand what is the first underlying is available. And if we had a building like this, it would have about roughly 100 affordable homes in this building. And so now that we've kind of shared a little bit of the background of the existing conditions and what a baseline building with no considerations look like, we're going to walk through an analysis to help illustrate possible ways of developing the site with various important considerations. The 3 buckets of these conversations will include building setbacks, outdoor memorial and open space considerations, and building height and massing. And so before going into these options, I want to say that these are just preliminary site analysis diagrams for discussion purpose. Nothing is decided, nothing is fully designed. These are also going to be the topics in the breakout rooms that we'll be able to have more thorough discussions on. So the first one, the building setbacks. What are some possible building locations in relation to the street, memorial space, open space, and the adjacent Erasmus Hall? So first, looking for areas to where we can push the building away from the street can create opportunities for larger sidewalks, passive programming, and different type of experiences for pedestrians as they approach the building. Just like in this example in the picture is a Greenpoint Library. You can see that the building is pushed back from the sidewalk, allowing for opportunities of some type of programming. In this case, it's landscaping and seating. In our case, however, since Erasmus Hall has windows on the side of the building and is a landmark, we're suggesting a 30-foot setback that is usually a good distance for light and air for both buildings. Another setback option that we're looking at is aligning the building with Erasmus Hall along Bedford Avenue back 20 feet from the sidewalk, which will also allow opportunities for a larger sidewalk and open space, but also respecting their alignment of Erasmus Hall. In this analysis, we explored adding another setback along Church Avenue. Typically, we would suggest aligning a building with adjacent buildings, but this option was to consider respecting the historical burial ground boundaries on the corner and also the location of the human remains that were found, generally where those arrows are pointing. along here and here, right, that we previously located. Alternatively, there's another option if we were to have a larger setback between Erasmus and the new building. This type of larger setback between two buildings can create more of an intimate space, right? More of an intimate space because it is a little bit less visible from the corner and it's kind of wedged between two buildings. And so in summary of the setback locations, there are a few options of what is possible. I would note that all of these respect the historical burial ground boundaries at the corner, while the option in the middle additionally respects the locations of the human remains found on the side. Second section, outdoor memorial and open space. So the questions we asked are like, what are the potential site configurations for outdoor memorial and open space that can honor the historical burial ground and provide programming opportunities? After getting a general understanding of where we can have setbacks and opportunities for open space, we can start thinking about where can the prominent memorial space opportunities be located. Right, so we came to about 3 options. The first one is on the corner, right? It responds to the historical burial ground boundaries on the corner, and also noting that this example, I think we previously looked at before, which is the African Burial Ground Monument in Manhattan, is also a corner lot condition. However, this site, this one in Manhattan is a lot larger than our site at 2286 Church Avenue. A corner space, a corner memorial open space can be celebrated. It's visible, it's accessible, right? And typically, corner open spaces are relatively successful. Secondly, which works more with the setbacks that occur on both streets that respect the historical burial ground boundaries and the locations of where human remains were found. But this prominent memorial open space would be along Church Avenue, that's noted in the red. Its location is right up against that smaller future building that we were talking about, opportunities for a blank wall, maybe something can go up there, a mural or something, but it's also a little bit smaller. It's visible from Church Avenue and it's welcoming. I would note that it is on the northern side, so there may be a little less sun, right, if the sun is coming up from the south. It is along Church Avenue, right? Remembering the character of Church Avenue, it's kind of more of a retail, and there's some smaller offices, but it's always good to think about what that character is like along Church Avenue. Alternatively, the interior open space, right, when we were talking about that setback, the prominent memorial space opportunity in this option would sit within the larger setback between Erasmus and the new building. And since this is sandwiched between two buildings, the potential memorial open space would have opportunities to be a little bit more intimate, right, given its mid-block setting. And in summary, right, of the memorial and open space options, there are a few options, as always. I would note that these, once again, all respect the historical burial ground boundaries at the corner, while the option in the middle additionally respects the locations of the human remains. And in the third section, building height and massing. And so the question we like to ask is, how does the size and location of an outdoor memorial and open space affect the building footprint, height, and number of affordable homes? So this is just one example that explains, that kind of walks through when considering how the size and location of an outdoor memorial and open space can affect the building footprint, height, and number of affordable homes. So you'll notice on the far left, on our left, the baseline building on the left has no considerations, right? And it would have approximately 100 homes, and it has approximately 21% of the site is open space. That open space would, however, be in the rear, right? It's kind of unseen in this angle, but if you imagine the building in the front, sometimes there's open space in the back. And then moving on to the second image, when we push the building a little bit in, and it creates an open space, you'll notice that there's a significant drop in the amount of affordable homes from 100 to 65, right? Obviously, we're reducing the amount of buildings, so the amount of homes are getting minimized. However, it does start to address, right, certain memorial and open space goals. Then on the third image on the far right, if we were to add a few additional floors to the building, there is a substantial trade-off to have more affordable homes, right? And so when considering adding a few floors to a building, there's a lot of considerations to be made when thinking about how tall a building can be, right? Like what is what kind of height is appropriate for this site? What kind of height is appropriate for the surrounding area, right? We don't want it to be way too tall. We don't want it to be way too small. Right? So there's lots of considerations we think about that we mentioned like in the beginning. And so when working with HPD, we've also heard that having additional units ultimately allows for more financial opportunities and more affordability options. So then looking at how these apply to different setback and memorial open space consideration options, we started to consider how do those few additional floors add on. And so once again, these are just preliminary analysis. Nothing is final in this options. These are just diagrams to help facilitate conversations, right? And so adding height and a few floors allows us to achieve more affordable homes while also maintaining larger open space and memorial options. And so I would also note that it doesn't have to be a 14-story building, but I placed Canton Flats, an example of that, which is a couple of blocks away. Some of you may be familiar with this building, but just so you can understand what 14 floors feels like, Canton Flats is also a 14-floor building. And that's all. Thank you so much. Are there any questions?
Yes, how you doing, Jesse? Thank you for the presentation.
Hello.
Question for the third example that you gave, in which you're going up to the 14th floor. How many stories would that be?
I'm sorry, are you talking about the one that's showing right now on the third image?
Yes, the third image.
Yeah, these considerations are kind of going back and forth between a range of 9 to 14 floors.
Okay. And because I'm trying to visualize this tangibly, how many stories would that be, roughly, in your estimation?
Oh, that is 14 stories. Sorry.
Okay. 14 floors, 14, got you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, floor stories. I'm kind of using it interchangeably.
Okay, got you. Thank you.
Yeah, and Canton Flats is an example of that. It's a 14-story building.
As you talk about the number of affordable units, the number fluctuates drastically.
Yes.
Based on the number of floors. I would imagine that it also fluctuates drastically based on the size of the units. And so as you're saying, 125 affordable homes, I think that ties to the 14 floors. What is the unit mix of 125 affordable units?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think, and HPD, if someone's on there, feel free to jump in, but I'll kind of give the first answer is, when we kind of did this analysis, when we do very preliminary early analysis, we try to we have like kind of an estimation of like a middle ground of what the floors are, and it's kind of an average of what any unit mix could be. And we don't think, at least from our initial analysis, we don't pick or favor any type of unit size right off the bat. And it's just an estimate. That's why we say about 125. It could be less, it could be more, depending on the different types of unit sizes.
So the average, when you're saying the average that you're using, and I think that is very hard for me to conceptualize, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
And so what I'm saying is that, as you're saying, okay, this is an average of 125 units, I would think that you're saying, okay, in that average, it's this percent would be one family, one bedroom, this percent would be studio, this percent would be 2-bedroom, that might be a part of that calculation of the average. And so I'm curious, is that a part of the average or is it not? And so when you say these 125 units, what type at all, if you can share, would be helpful?
Yeah, we tend to have, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Jesse, I can jump in a little bit too, because it's somewhat related to just the HPD design guidelines and the rough calculations. I think a good way to think about it, and this is an answer, unfortunately, this isn't answered directly, but it gets to it, is these numbers, the larger the units, right, the less numbers you'll have. I think what's shown here is based on like some architectural calculation that would fit everything from studios to about 3-bedroom units. So if you had more, say, 2 bedrooms and less studios, some of these numbers might shift and vice versa, right? So, I don't, I don't have like a live calculator to do that kind of shift, but any HPD program that we would be doing that's not geared only towards seniors or only towards supportive housing would have a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, as well as larger family size bedrooms, if that's really what the preference would be.
Okay. And I would imagine that the larger mix will probably be 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms.
That I'm sorry, the larger
weight would be toward 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a maximum. We always are wary of providing too many studios in any of these buildings, because that's actually, so there's like a maximum almost in each one of our programs about the amount of studios, the amount of 1 bedrooms, and a minimum for the number of 2 bedrooms and larger, and that varies by the program. And I can, we can send that information later if that's helpful too.
Thank you.
I think also I can add on to get to your detailed answer is what we like to do when we're just getting a ballpark estimate of like units. There's a number we use, like 860 square feet, that's usually just a general number that we use to get an average, right? Because sometimes units are below, sometimes units are above it. But just for quick exercises like this, because nothing is determined, we just pick 860, divide it by the total square footage, and we say, oh, this is roughly how many units we can get, right?
And I know this is a very preliminary stage, and I'm sorry, Sean, this is going to be my last question. Is there any, has any thought been given to the demographics of Flatbush in terms of family size and what community has expressed in terms of housing needs? Or is it too preliminary for that?
I think that's a good point, and we usually I don't want to say it's too preliminary for that, but it's any of these massings and how the building is situated can work with either larger units or smaller units. That's more like if the community expresses a preference to make sure that there's some larger units or more larger units or perhaps more studios, those can be adapted, like the unit mix can be adapted into the different shapes of buildings and different site plans that you see on the slide. So that's definitely a discussion that we can have, but it doesn't directly relate necessarily to the setback options, the building height, and like the location of the memorial space that Jesse was presenting on today.
Thank you, Josh. And I just wanted to follow up on that as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to Sean, who's had her hand up for some time, to also just keep in mind that, as Josh indicated, community insight is going to be strong here as well. And so we want to ensure that we gain insight from the community engagement process and the workshops on some of these topics. And then also thinking that there is going to be moments of engagement tied to the site development, even beyond the RFP process. So I just wanted to remind ourselves of that as well. Sean, I wanted to make sure that you were able to ask your question.
Thank you. And Naima, no apologies necessary. They were good questions. And so I benefited by waiting to hear them because there's a lot of good thoughts wrapped up within those questions. I just want to, nice to see you again, Josh. You made a really excellent and thorough presentation to my board last night. And nice to be with you on the screen again too, Jonah. I do want to just make sure that it's said out loud, these schematics, these potential schematics, they don't anticipate or they don't reflect current zoning, or do they? Zoning, there might be a zoning change application tied into some of these, like a 14-story might not be as of right development, for instance, correct?
Yeah, that's very, very good observation. Yeah, that's definitely the idea. Was we didn't want to focus this when we let me back up. The baseline building that we looked at from the very beginning, that was just kind of an L that has no consideration to open space. That would be, what is the existing zoning today, right? And it's a C44L, which is an R7A and very technical, but that allows for a 9-story building, right? If we were just to develop that corner with no considerations, you can build a 9-story building, right? And so that's what the underlying is, right? And so from there we were thinking, okay, well, if we were to think about any site on any corner, what can this area handle in terms of height and density? Like we thought, something along, it could go up a few more floors because, the streets are pretty wide. It's a wide street. It's an active corner. It's a location of transit, and also the height of surrounding buildings. We thought around 14 stories, and it doesn't have to be, right? This is just for discussion that we thought 14 floors is something that would be comfortable in this area, right?
Right, and I get that that's partly because you had the Caton Flats comparison, but, and I don't know if you have it now, but if you're going to use that as a comparison, it'd be interesting to know the square footage of that lot that contains that building, and just to simply note that there is absolutely no outdoor space with that Caton Flats development. So I just wanted apples to be more apples to apples than just everything that's 14 feet in the area. And then finally, and this is kind of Naima's point too, I would hope it'd be useful to know the extent to which there's financial incentives for developers in the different sort of combination of units that might be offered in the building, and to have those sort of financial incentives that developers might reap as part of the conversation for the sake of transparency.
I don't think I can speak to the financial things. Josh, are you able to key in on that?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think those
It certainly doesn't have to be answered now. I just
Yeah.
kind of wanted to throw that out as the conversation unfolds, that is part of what brings them to the table.
Yeah, no, and to be honest, I think those conversations sometimes are really good to have once there's a developer on board, because they can adjust with a proposal on hand. They can start adjusting according to what the community wants to see. If it's more larger units, if it's more smaller units, and really understand how it impacts according to like all the financing mechanisms that they're using to make sure that the project stays feasible, but they're still trying to achieve that right mix that the community is looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And I also just wanted to piggyback that Sean did bring up the zoning topic. And so that's something that is just going to be continued to be examined, and knowing that zoning also comes with its fair share of community engagement as well. That is something that will be continued.
And Claudia, if I can just add just a note on, I don't want to stick too much on the zoning, but really when we engaged DCP before this meeting, we tried to take what we heard from the previous task force sessions about the importance of outdoor space, the importance of honoring the location of where the burial was, and creating a space where you can get that sense, and like that this is not just like a regular one of those baseline sites that we kind of showed in the beginning, but how do we achieve all these goals, and to provide that, and to see how these trade-offs work is really why what we're thinking of here, and what we asked DCP to kind of come up with some ideas for discussion today. And I'll let Chris take it from there, or Claudia. I might be jumping the gun a little bit.
No, that's great. Thank you for that context. We have time for maybe one or two more questions if there are any. So just wanted to check if anyone else had a follow-up question to the presentation.
I think for me, I just wanted to clarify to the rest of the people in the group why my question was really around the size of the units, right? Because as we look at trade-offs, will that number, if we say, well, we want a building that's not higher than 9 floors, so that it matches more the land, the streetscape, and we say, okay, well, we'll get 65 units, unless it's turned into home ownership in the last meeting, that we'll get 65 units at 9 feet. As I think then about unit size, I know that number can drop below 65. And so I was trying to figure out, can it drop below 65, or is 65 like as low as it will get, or is it the maximum? So that's really what I'm trying to figure out, just so everyone can kind of really know what other trade-offs are in place as we make these decisions.
Thank you so much, Naima. And definitely trade-offs is a big mechanism to examine here across the different explorations. And actually, we are going to talk a bit more about that throughout our dialogue today, but thank you for bringing that up.
And Naima, I do want to just jump in a moment so that help us frame our discussion as a group, as we start talking about kind of our priorities. We're not going to make a decision as a task force, the number of units, right? I think that's something that is important. And this was something that I always have to remind myself of, like we're using these units and we're thinking about different sizes and heights to help us understand what could be and what are the different components. And exactly as you said, I appreciate you use the term trade-offs because that's exactly what we're thinking about. What we do want to talk about when we look at these examples, for example, is how comfortable are we if we go above 9 stories? Right? What does that impact? What are those trade-offs, right? And then similarly, when we start talking about setbacks and other things, all of these pieces play off each other, as you said. And I think what we want to hear is, where are those priorities? Is the priority on how it fits into the landscape or other types of uses and how it connects to the memorialization? Because all of those will be put into in combination with the recommendation that we've already talked through around affordable housing. And those will, again, support the shortlisted group of developers to develop a set of kind of options and directions that they could for the building. So I just want us to be clear today, we're going to be talking about priorities, but we're not going to be making any decisions on X number of units because there are so many different factors at play. And I apologize, I'm just sharing this also because when I looked at these, sometimes I got stuck on the numbers and I'm like, wait a second. It just helps us understand higher means potentially more units, potentially means we're supporting having a broader reach in regards to how many people could be benefiting from the building. And of course, other benefits that a higher building might have. But again, we'll talk through that in more detail when we dive into the discussions.
And Chris, that was actually a perfect segue for the discussion and a great framing of the discussion. But I just wanted to, just as we wrap up from the presentation, thank everyone for, it's a lot of information and it's a lot of technical material that we're now getting into territory-wise. And so I just thank you for your flexibility and patience as we really kind of digest all of this and what this can look like for our site in particular. We're now going to transition into our first dialogue around the site planning and the urban design of the space. And so in Jesse's presentation, he was able to give us a bit of an overview around setbacks, the open space and memorialization, as well as the massing of the site and what kind of different opportunities could lie here. And so we want to give ourselves some more time to really go a little bit deeper into what that looks like and kind of walk away with some key priorities that we want to ensure is relayed across to the public workshops and what we hope to gain from their perspectives as well. So in a moment, I'm going to actually bring back some of the DCP slides to support this dialogue. But before I do so, I just would love to ask a question to launch this discussion based on what you just saw and everything you know up to this point and what you know of the site when you look at it and imagining yourself at the site. How do you envision it coexisting within the immediate neighborhood? That can mean within the block it's on, the surrounding immediate blocks, but on a more general level, I'd love to just learn more what you think coexisting looks like for this building across Church and Bedford intersections. You can think through the lens of what open space must look like, or the footprint, or talking about tallness again, as we've already brought up so far. And I invite you, if it even helps to close your eyes and see yourself on that intersection, feel free to do so. That might help to picture yourself as what it looks like now and what it's to come.
Well, I'll start things off. I was so excited seeing the open space, seeing the amount of open space that was possible until I saw that it would actually be cutting into the homes, and that So I'm really very much on the fence, but initially the design that had the open space that was very accessible as opposed to the one that was kind of hidden in the back was very appealing, especially since there's not a lot of public space and not a lot of green space, and that could be something along those lines. Also, in one of the earlier diagrams that showed where the burial ground roughly was, I had this thought of something that would actually overlap beyond the actual footprint of the lot, like even, I don't know, something on the sidewalk that would designate that. But it's just a thought that occurred to me.
I just pulled them up just to support in case.
Thank you,
This is
Lauren.
referencing.
Others want to jump in about what you envisioned? And again, you can connect to what you've seen, but also just what comes to mind about, like, how does it fit or doesn't fit or connects to or doesn't connect to what's surrounding it.
For me, I like the idea of a larger open space that is suggested, I think, in the third drawing. I think it's about 50 feet across and deep, as we talked about in one of the last meetings, an opportunity for there to be ongoing performance or activities in the space. I know that something wider gives it the ability to do those type of, it gives you more variety in what you can do. I am also drawn to the one in the middle that wraps around both sides, because I think that it will draw, more people into it, whereas the one that's all kind of pocketed in, you could really come up church and walk right past it and never really encounter it per se. I know that hasn't, but that I think that is some of my thoughts.
That's a great point. And even looking at the setback explorations, keeping in mind that an opportunity with the site is arts and culture, and we've heard that time and time again. And so that is a key consideration of when we have to kind of, weigh the trade-offs. And I thank you for that. That's great. For others, just looking at the summary of setback explorations that Jesse gave us a rundown of, I'd just love to hear from others if what you're looking at aligns with the vision you've had up until now, or what are some new considerations you were thinking, or moments of opportunity or limitation of what you see. Ryan, your hand is up.
Jump on in.
Hey, everybody. I just wanted to echo everyone that said that I think maximizing the open space is really imperative, particularly around the areas where it has been determined that human remains and ancestral remains have been found. That said, I would also think about like the design of the building, and I know we're not getting into that, but ensuring that the design of the building sort of could itself either add additional open space on rooftops. Maybe there's open commercial, open sort of arts and cultural space on a rooftop, or one of the setbacks, or the design of the building itself could be in this form of some sort of how it's designed as a memorial to those people that were lost and their remains found. So that's more of a design for the building itself. But I think this whole, I know the borough president cares very deeply about open space in this particular area, recognizing that affordable housing is a really important component of this project and the need for affordable housing in this area. But we do want to make sure that we're recognizing the past and honoring the past in a real meaningful way. And, I think we do that primarily through expanded open space, maximizing the open space, and also into the design of the building. So whatever architect is chosen should have a vision of how this building is going to be respectful of the space and, integrate memorial ideas and open space into the building as well.
That's great. Thank you, Ryan. Tyrone, I see that you have your hand up. Feel free to jump in.
Sure. Some great ideas which was shared and also some good points to consider. It actually did. Actually, some of it exceeded my expectations because going from left to right, the middle one, I didn't expect the possibility of having a wraparound memorial. Or open space. I didn't consider that. I always thought of probably just a pocket, at the crossroads, but not actually a wraparound. So, that's encouraging. And the fact that I know Bedford tends to have a little bit less traffic, but at least with the third slide, there is a opportunity for more open space, which actually, it's a good thing. Is actually a good thing. My only consideration, if it would be 14 floors, if we would go to the max, even though it does provide more housing, my only concern is that would make it probably the tallest building on that block, I presume. I know across the street, at least from Bedford, you have a gas station. And then on the Church Avenue side, directly across the street, you have like the post office, you have a restaurant. So I know it'll probably be a sore thumb, so to speak. So that's something to consider, because I know it, I don't think there's at least on that block, there's probably not another building that height, but yeah.
Tyrone, thank you for sharing that. I actually want to that was a helpful piece. If you don't mind going back 2 slides, Claudia, I want to stay on the site setbacks for a second. One thing that I want us to look at, and I appreciate all the different bits of feedback in regards to open space, but one of the questions that I want us to consider is thinking about how important is the building being aligned with the buildings next to it. So as you look on Bedford, Erasmus is already set back, okay? So that could be, and again, we're just talking through different opportunities, so it'd be set back, so it is in alignment with it. But as you look along Church, the building next to it goes right up to the sidewalk, right? And there's different considerations about how important it is to be aligned with those buildings or have it set back from them. So I want us to take that moment to consider how important is it, or when you think of this vision for this building, when you think about the setbacks in particular, how does that connect in regards to how this building fits with the buildings next to it? And I want us less to think about height for a moment, just to think about it alignment along the street edge. And if you have any priorities that we should consider.
Christina, if I could, Sean Campbell, if I could speak to that a little bit on a really pedestrian, practical point, and that is that this is a lot that is very dirty. I mean, it's a litter magnet. That corridor is a litter magnet, and it's partly because of activity in the area, partly just because of how it's aligned with Windstream. I don't know, but it's difficult to keep clean. And so a setback consideration might want to consider that. There's either going to be, especially on the Church Avenue side, a higher, a more onerous maintenance requirement if the building is set back on the Church Avenue side. And I'm saying this as a sort of practical, factual point, because I also just want to say here that I'm trying to be very careful about, I don't want to speak on behalf of the community in terms of what the community would feel and accept. The community board doesn't do that. We provide opportunities for the community to speak on its own behalf. And so we're going to be part of bringing those workshops forward. So I've tried to keep this sort of factual and experiential. But I did want to point out that as the person who took more garbage calls on that corner in the past 10 years, probably than any other, it's a difficult to keep clean block. And so setting back on the Bedford side and then having space between the buildings seems that it will be the self-maintenance will it will just have greater benefits for self-maintenance.
Thank you, Sean. I think that's a great consideration for us to keep in mind as we talk through setbacks, because there are so many layers, right? And you have personal experience of what's been happened on that corner. And I think that's very important that we hear as we move forward. I wanted to open that question again to others as you think about the consideration of the building alignment. I think thinking about how pedestrians might use the pathways along the sidewalks. What are some of those priorities in regards to the setbacks, or are setbacks a priority?
Christina, I have to jump off and go to my board meeting. So I just wanted to, listening to what everyone is saying, thinking about, I think, alignment with the buildings on Church Avenue makes sense. I think that in that, as I also think about it giving opportunity for the larger performance or activity space, and this has gone much further into plan, but perhaps that first floor then becomes almost like glass so that you can see through into that open outdoor space, so that we're still drawing people in, as we talked about. I know we also talked about in terms of memorial and indoor outdoor space. And so if some way that first floor in alignment on Church Avenue, more open on the interior, and then a glass indoor component to the outdoor space. I'm gonna leave that there. And I'm so sorry I have to jump to my board meeting, and looking forward to reading the minutes and attachments following the meeting.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Naima.
Robin, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, I do. I looking at these designs and thinking about what Sean, going back to like even what Sean was saying, about the garbage becomes a really big part of it. But the other thing I was thinking is that this is kind of setting the tone for what happens next, because development is coming whether we like it or not. So if we're not carefully considering what's happening here, how do we make sure that moving forward, that there's careful consideration if we're doing setbacks, if we're not doing setbacks. So I'm looking at this with a forward thinking lens, that this is setting the tone for what's going to happen on that block as time moves forward and as buildings sell, as they will inevitably do.
Robin, with that, can I ask you to elaborate as you think forward? Because I think that's a helpful perspective. Like, what's coming to mind for you as you think along Church and so on? I just want to know, I think it's a helpful perspective to think about.
Sure. I mean, what's happening, Sean can speak to this better than I can. However, but once property goes for sale, usually there's multiple buildings, especially like looking right now on Flatbush Avenue. There's almost a quarter or three-quarters or half of a block that is boarded off right now. Right. So having that being boarded off the way it is, we know that there's construction coming. We know that there's going to be new buildings coming in. So I'm saying this is what's going to happen here, right? There's going to be construction coming down the line. We know that buildings are inevitably going to sell along that same corridor, because most of them are, low buildings. So either they're going to sell or they're going to sell air rights. So I'm just saying this is really setting the tone for what's to come down the line.
Yep, that's helpful. I think it's a helpful perspective to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. So I want us to just come back to the open space and memorialization piece again, and I've moved on to those slides. And I want us to kind of looking at these again, and Naima, who jumped off, but something that's truly resonating with her, for example, is this cultural space. And so open space would help to promote and provide for that. And so there are a lot of opportunities and benefits with maximized open space. But I just love to hear, does anyone have any gleanings towards any limitations or just considerations to keep in mind with what comes with more open space? And just knowing also what Sean just shared about garbage as another example that also intersects into the open space dialogue and where the memorial is. So. Or just looking at these in general, are there, and if this, does this really kind of line up with what you were thinking walking into the meeting? It could be another way to stand at it.
Alternative, we can get real specific if you guys would like. We wanted to give space to not dive into the specificity right away, but we wanted to ask a very specific question about open space in regards to the memorialization. If we go back to what had been shared in previous meetings, we've heard that there was an interest of having some form of outdoor and indoor memorial. And we want to kind of take a moment to look at these examples here that were shared by Jesse show where a memorial could be located. And again, we can think about the information that was shared from HPI in regards to the footprint of where the African burial ground might have been. I want to ask you guys if you have any specific thoughts or priorities in regards to where should the memorial be located on the site footprint. Reverend Hamblin, feel free to jump in. I see your hand is up.
Yes. So I'm thinking and I'm trying to imagine the space right now. And I really have to go back there physically to really, let all of this sink in. But right now, the third one for me would be more appropriate.
Can I ask you to elaborate a little bit about why that resonates with you? So the one you're looking at, just making sure I'm going from left to right. So you're talking about the one that has it in between the building and okay, perfect.
And to me, I think it is more intentional and it really honors the sacredness of the site.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
As opposed to the other two are just tucked on at the side or at the corner.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts that anyone wants to add to that, or other things that you're keep thinking about as you think about how the memorial, the outdoor component might connect to whatever the indoor component of the memorial might be?
Another thing that we heard, oh, I'm sorry, Robin.
So yeah, I mean, I also wanted to say that if it was too in the center, it might not be welcoming to, folks might not feel like they're welcomed in there. But I don't think, I keep leaning towards the third as long as it's an open area. As long as it's not gated, you know what I mean? As long as it's an open, because I think that is where you're going to have a little more quiet, less garbage, and could be a very reflective space. I think looking on a corner, it's going to be too difficult. It's going to be loud between the buses and trucks. So that's my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm. And Robin, I just wanted to follow up. Open, when you say open, also thinking to pedestrian traffic as well from the street, moving into that in between space.
Yes. Making sure that it's like a welcome feeling that I can walk into this space and not like, oh, well, this space belongs to that building and therefore I'm not welcome here.
That's great.
Can I ask a question for folks? And I apologize, looking at the site or not, but I think there's a challenge, right, of balancing the experience of the sacredness or the feelings that we hope for, and potentially the actual footprint of where the burial ground was located. So I'm wondering if anyone has, and I'm really speaking from my own lens of things that I'm thinking about and hearing as we look at this, of the things you're sharing about that, what we're hoping it to feel like, but is there any tension on having it connected to where we have the footprint of the burial ground, and also where the human remains were located in the archaeological findings several years ago? Is there any kind of tension that you guys are feeling around that, or are comfortable with the memorial not being located exactly on the boundaries?
I think just from drawing from past conversations, what I recall hearing was, took this entire site as the site and didn't really subdivide the uses in terms of what overlaid with the enslaved Africans burial ground, and got that specific about locations of ancestral remains. What sticks with me more was what the memorial would elicit. And there was a lot of talk about space for quiet reflection, and also this idea of leading from the inside, sort of this journey that you would walk through the building or through a path to the location for reflection. And I think Naeem has shared a really beautiful vision of being able to see it from, if you could see it from church and it drew you over and into the actual location of the memorial. I think that speaks to a lot of what's been said in previous conversations.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
I also wanted to chime in, and Sean, you bring up a good point about that reflective, and we've also heard from the Reverend speaking about the space as a sacred space, and that came across the meetings in the past as well. So thinking about the memorialization in this open space, I'd be curious to know, kind of the memorial itself, should it stand alone, or can moments of open space and programming kind of blend in as well, and what may that look like, and where are limitations or challenges there you see?
I guess to get more specific with that question is, are we comfortable with the open spaces of which might be youth doing an activity and a memorial of them interconnecting, or would it be better potentially to keep them separate in some way? Tyrone, jump in. I see you turn your mic on. Or Reverend Hamblin, feel free. I see you both have mics off.
Okay, so these are some tough questions to consider. And
totally fair.
And I'm also thinking of the burial ground in Lower Manhattan. And, I think they probably have more space to work with. They had you go in on one entrance, and then the open space where the actual memorial, excuse me.
It's okay. We don't mind the background music. It sounded nice.
Church Avenue. My office is right on Church Avenue. Anyway, so you go through and then you go into the actual memorial section, which is completely away from the whatever activity is going on.
Right. So it's a challenge. So kind of thinking about if there's opportunities to lead through might help create some of those separations and appropriate separations. It's helpful to think about. Other thoughts, Tyrone? I saw you had your mic off. I didn't know if you had something you wanted to add.
I just need a few more seconds.
Oh, take your time. No rush.
Roll it over. Sorry.
Any other thoughts about the connection of potentially recreation activities and in connection to the memorial as those outdoor spaces?
This is sort of where I go back to. I mean, I understand the utility in getting some comments from the task force, because we've been a part of so many conversations prior to this, and I think are generally a very thoughtful group. But this is really the question, because, as Reverend Hamlin said, it's a tough one. It really is. I think this is the sort of stuff that needs to go public and needs to get all the voices gathered in a room and let it be cacophonous at first until it drills down into some consensus and community agreement. I think this is where the vox populi is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Sean, thank you for saying that. And Chris mentioned back at the setting of the goals for tonight that even this conversation we're having now is kind of like an opportunity and trial run for us to really understand what are those questions we have to be asking in the public meetings. And so this, just to give you a feel that this is what we hope to also have in conversation and breakout groups in those 2 workshops in May, because this is the moment where that insight is critical. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give us a moment, if we could look at this one again, just once again, and this is really discussing massing and height and what that would look like. And so I just wanted to give a moment for folks just to be able to bring up anything else, again, they wanted to say on this front. I've been hearing from a few folks like that 14th floor consideration is real in the space, and what that looks like on the existing block of Church and Bedford is a big key consideration here. But what may else pop in your mind when thinking about height and what we should carry forward to bring to the public workshops?
I think another way to just ask this question is, how important is it that this building, and I think Naima brought this up before, of it being potentially taller than the building next to it. And Tyrone, you noted that as well, of like its connection to other buildings. I just want us to kind of really have that moment to connect to if you have any kind of see the opportunity or the potential in a higher building, or any concerns that you might see in a higher building, and us talk through a little bit of those priorities.
I think it's worth also to bring forth what Robin mentioned a few moments ago, that this is also kind of that moment of setting the tone as well. And so thinking landscape wise of what's existing there and what's to come. Just wanted to also bring that forward as well.
I'm sorry, you can go ahead and cut me off if it's like at the bar, but I do want to say that I haven't seen a tall building proposed in the community without community pushback on the height of the building. Every time a building has gone higher than the neighboring buildings, there's local community pushback. And I think, even to Robin's point, that might not be a sort of, Robin put that so positively, and I was nodding my head as she spoke, but the flip side of that is people can be like, oh no, then that's a sign of things to come. Oh no, now we're gonna have, and the community is called 9-story buildings skyscrapers. So, you know, a 14-story building might it just based on experience could open the doors for a lot of local opposition, because it does seem out of scale, and it might look like it's precedent setting in a way that the community might not welcome.
I tend to agree. However, if the 14 floors, if that's going to mean that some of the apartments are going to be bigger. I live on Albemarle Terrace, and which is off of East 21st. And there's that huge building going on. And I look in and I see those rooms, and those rooms are so small. You know, so if the 14 floors will mean that there's a possibility that families will have bigger spaces, affordable, then that might be something to consider.
Mm-hmm. And that's all about the trade-offs
Mhm.
that keeps coming up this evening. Absolutely.
Natiba, I saw that you might wanted to jump in there in a moment, wanted to turn to you.
No, I was gonna say the same thing. You know, the trade-off would be if it means more affordable spaces for folks that they might be more open to it.
I think one of the other trade-offs that we can consider, and I want to ask you guys, is that is there the other direction is to look at potentially less open space, right? And to be more sitting it in the neighborhood. Is that a consideration or something that we should be, or is still the priority trying to look at more open space, I guess?
I mean, I think for me, the open space is kind of, it's an important part of, I think, what we all discussed and want to see. And it's also not something that there's a lot of in that area.
Yep.
One question that I have, and I think the Natiba and also the Reverend raised a good question regarding the affordability, you know. So I think that should be noted. Another question I have is the higher the buildings erected, would that affect in terms of light, in terms of the open area? How would that impact the open space? That's another question that I have. You know, as far as sunlight and or would it make it wouldn't make much of a difference, you know, at nine floors as opposed to 14 floors. So that's another question that I had.
Maybe someone from HPD or DCP, can you guys jump in to provide some framing in regards to what might be some implications of light and so on by the higher building?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, I think considering 5 floors, right? What that difference would be between 9 and 14 floors. I think regardless, right now there's nothing there, right? I think it's not nothing there, but it's an open kind of an open lot with no building. So right now, essentially, when we put anything on top of, if we were to put any type of building on the lot, there will be some type of shadow created, right? Regardless of that. And so I think the difference between 9 and 14 floors, though, you know, I think there would have to be more of a thorough analysis. But I think my quick assumption is that between 9 and 14, there probably might not be too much of a difference, but I don't want that to be like a solid answer in that.
And just Jesse, to add for a second, when you're talking about the effect on the open space, are we talking about like potential open space on the site as is shown here? Because I think Jesse, you alluded to this earlier, that the amount of sunlight, say if you were to put the open space between the two buildings versus on the corner of Bedford and Church, I'm not sure. My understanding is that the height wouldn't necessarily affect that.
Oh yes, yeah.
Because of the orientation of where the sun is, right?
Yeah, is there a way to go to a different, the slide that shows the 3 options? Maybe, yeah, go back. The one that has
Which one?
The one that emphasizes the memorial spaces.
Oh, yes, here we go.
This one, right? So maybe I could just quickly, if I just thinking about sun and shadow on the memorial space, I could walk through from the left to right. So essentially, we're looking, if we were to look at this, north is kind of on the bottom right of the screen, right? So the sun would be coming from the Erasmus side, right, on the south. And so essentially, as it's coming, the one on the left, right, the corner open space would probably have the most access to like AM morning sun, right? Because it's facing when the sun's coming up and it has not blocked by any building really. But then the option in the middle, since that's on the north side, right? That is on the north angle, that would probably have the least amount of sun, right? And then on the third option, the one that seems to be kind of favored by some members of the task force, the only sun that would be blocking that open space would be the Erasmus building, right? So we could, if anything, you could go there right now and see how the sun reacts to that space due to the Erasmus landscape building, or Erasmus landmark building. If that helps answer your question of shadows.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, but regardless, by putting a building there, it will create some form of shadow on Church Avenue, right? Because right now there's nothing there, and if something comes up, it's gonna create a small shadow on Church Avenue, right?
Thank you, Jesse. That's very helpful. I want to see if anyone else has any thoughts that we should keep in mind, any other priorities that we haven't talked about. We've talked about setbacks, we've talked about open space, and of course, we've started talking about the different potential, again, opportunities or limitations with the higher building. I just want to see if there's anything else anyone wants to add before we take a break and then jump forward into kind of reflecting on other topics that we've had or talked about in previous workshops.
Yeah, just quickly, what the buildings, the number of units would also dictate things like parking requirements. And I'm wondering if at this phase of the considerations, if like ingress and egress and parking requirements and all of that have been thought about in terms of how it would interact with design.
That's a great question. HPD or DCP, do you want to jump in?
So the parking requirements, I believe, don't change because it's an affordable housing building, and it's in an area that is close to transit. So if there are any, it would only be because of a community facility or commercial space. That's my understanding. And Jesse, feel free to jump in and correct me. The questions of egress and like things like elevators, you know, it's all like the architect has to look at that. To be honest, the most efficient building here would be like what's the baseline, which is not what we're heading towards, right? Because we want to memorialize the open space. So we're trying to think of ways to balance like building efficiency with providing that open space, which is why we're considering going higher. But it doesn't necessarily, it's not as big of an issue between like the different scenarios and the height. I think once you get that open space, it would be similar, regardless of where the memorial is.
Yeah, and I think also to kind of add on to that, Josh, thanks. Since this is an affordable component, and in their transit, there is a reduced amount of parking that would be necessary or required anywhere else, right? Also, typically, there may be some assumption that the parking would just be accommodated in the cellar right below. So that's why that wasn't really considered what it would look like above ground, or that wouldn't really affect the open space essentially, or the memorial space, right? But also if parking is a constraint, you know, there's future discussions of that maybe that can come about of how can we reduce the requirement if that's a priority.
Lauren, we just saw that your hand was raised, and then after Lauren, I think we'll have to move on to a break, but we're able to keep getting questions waterfalled to us in next steps as well. So I'm gonna let Lauren close us.
Thanks, and I'm actually going to jump back to the discussion of the interior open space. While we were talking, I jumped over to Instant Street View to see what it looks like. And looking at the lot, Erasmus is kind of a substantial building. It looks like it's about 4 to 5 stories. I mean, 4 windows, but it's in the photo that happens to be on Instant Street View, it's completely shadowed. So it just gives me a different impression looking at the rendering from a bird's eye view. It has a feeling of being more open, but when I look at it from the street view, it looks like it might feel like a tunnel. So I just want to throw that in.
Mm-hmm. Lauren, I think you're also bringing up a good point that I think it's helpful for us. If you haven't been back to the site, it might be something to consider before we kind of make our final recommendations or refine the recommendations back in, sorry, I'm going to say future in June. It's just something that might be helpful as we kind of move forward about those.
Can I make a suggestion? Just maybe the next task force meeting. I know the next one is optional. It's more about brainstorming for outreach. Could we do it at the location just to kind of, so everyone has a chance to sort of appreciate the feel, if people feel comfortable doing that?
I think it's something we can consider. And it's something we can talk about, is if that makes sense where we are in the process. And we'll take that back to the city team and think through that for sure. So I want to say, and thank you guys, this has been really helpful for us. And I do want to really acknowledge that this was, as with a lot of our other discussions, we'll be having a similar one with the public as part of the public workshops. And of course, as part of the questionnaire as well, as there are some questions in regards to kind of some of individual prioritization around the massing as well as open space and so on. But we do have lots to cover. Yeah. So Claudia, you think we'll take our break now?
Yep. I do, as I just said, as we always do, we'll have a survey after this meeting. So if any other questions kind of really come up in your mind after this, please keep them in mind and send them our way. And then I also just wanted to give a shout out and thank you to the Department of City Planning for joining us. It was a much technical conversation tonight, so I really appreciate Jesse for navigating all the questions and giving us the different explorations to keep in mind. So with that, we'll thank them. And we're going to now have a 5-minute break. So feel free to get up and stretch. And when we come back, we'll keep on the discussion.
So 5 minutes is like 7:01, just to give everyone a heads up. See you back soon. Just gonna ask, we're gonna start up in about 1 minute. So if everyone wants to come back, I apologize, 5 minutes is fast. We're gonna jump in so we can get you on your way. Thank you for those who are jumping in. I appreciate it. All right. We'll give everyone about 30 more seconds and then we're going to get started. Okay. So hopefully everyone will be able to join us in a second. And Claudia, if you are open and interested, you're welcome to just start us off and hopefully people will join us.
Sure. So the next part of our meeting is really to kind of reflect and look back and see how we got here this evening. And so the next part of the dialogue that we're going to be engaging in is really kind of taking all of the ideas and insights and considerations you've all presented so far across the different topics we've discussed as they relate to what could become of the recommendations, and really begin to refine them and see what we want to push forward with public engagement, specifically the public workshops and what folks should really be asked of for our project. So just to kind of give you a reminder of where we've been so far, our first meeting was in December. Not only was this our first time meeting as a task force and gave us an opportunity to do some kickoff and goal setting for ourselves, but also setting some goals and intentions for how we want to work as a task force and work on this project and what this project means in the context of Flatbush and descendant history. In February, we had meetings 2 and 3. The second one was really looking at some of the site history that we uncovered in the prior weeks, bringing that forth into identifying how we want to honor the site and the handling of the human remains already uncovered by HPI and other parties, but also those that may be uncovered in the future as the site is developed on. And then meeting 3 was focused on memorialization. And so really thinking about what can that look like and how does the memorial itself play a role for the Flatbush community in different ways, and how does it provide a sacred space of reverence, which was a priority. And then our last meeting in March was really looking at affordable housing and the non-residential amenities and thinking about the ground floor usage. And so HPD was able to provide us with context of the different opportunities to consider. So knowing that that's where we've gotten to at this point, we really wanted to have a dialogue where we'll allow you all to get into small groups again in a moment and kind of pick where you would like to go a little bit deeper this evening. And so the big overarching topics that you can choose to discuss this evening and talk a little bit more with your peers on is honoring of the site. And that will include a discussion on memorialization and the sensitive handling of the remains. Affordable housing is the second topic, including population served. And then topic 3 will be non-residential amenities, including ground floor and youth programming services. And so you'll have about 10 minutes per 2 topics that you would like to discuss this evening. So if you want to keep in mind what you would like to discuss, we'll break out into those rooms shortly. But first, I'd just like to give an overview of these 3 topics a bit more and capture what we've heard.
One thing, sorry, I'm just going to ask a quick request. If you know which topics you'd like to talk more about, can you just let us know in chat? Because it just helps us on the back end reorganize the rooms. Sorry to cut you off, Claudia.
Thanks.
Jump in.
Thank you, Chris. So yeah, that first topic, of course, is visioning and honoring of site and memorialization. And so some of the things we heard in the meeting so far is really that this is a site of respect and reverence and sacredness. And so that's going to matter in the design and everything that we set forth intentionally with memorialization. It's an opportunity to bring history forward, engage with our youth and use it as an education tool, and to actually disrupt and shift the narrative around how we talk about slavery and how we want to acknowledge the history of the African descendants that have been discovered on this site. And so some high visions you want to carry forward, really thought about the versatility of the space, inside, outside, also thinking about how the space is interactive and friendly for pedestrians, and how people look and use and feel this space essentially is a key consideration, as well as education and sacredness. And then some other things that came up were some physical specs for the site. Accessibility, like we discussed this evening, and it was great to see a bit of a visual of that this evening, is a key consideration you want to bring forward. And keeping in mind that there is sacredness in this process, that we are actually located on what is to believe that African burial ground at the corner of our site. And so keeping all of these things in mind, it's important that the design of the memorialization keeps that honoring path forward to engage with people in Flatbush. And then of course, education will always be a component as well. When we talked about the sensitive handling of remains in the second meeting, just some things I wanted to bring up were we discussed the reinterment of the actual remains discovered in the future. And so some things that were discussed were that they could actually remain on site, and that alone is a sign of reverence and respect to just keep them where they are and undisturbed. But we also heard an option that maybe it's an opportunity to return them to where they came from. And so that was an idea to think about West Africa as a destination. And then of course, also keeping in mind that we have this history knowing that the Dutch Reformed Church also uncovered ancestral remains as well. And so maybe that is the best opportunity for a resting place. DNA testing was discussed as something that should be considered if it becomes an option, because it also helps to kind of shift the narrative and learn more about the true history of the descendants discovered. And then in moments when remains are unearthed, there are opportunities to get the community involved, and members of the clergy and folks across the Flatbush community can really play a role in shaping ceremonies that support handling remains. So, I'm sorry, human remains, I have to correct my language. So in the next meeting, we talked about affordable housing and talked a bit about the population served. And so we heard a big spectrum that there are mixed needs of folks facing rent burdens in Flatbush. And so different groups of populations should absolutely be at the forefront of consideration for housing here. To meet those mixed needs, affordability is high priority and critical. And so this evening we got to get a glimpse into what the different opportunities there could be to maximize that. And that will also help the rent burdening issue, but also something that came forward was severe overcrowding that has been reported in the neighborhood as well. Some of the populations served, we heard, included homeless populations, knowing that there's a large population of them, and so programs should support their families and themselves. And also families in the neighborhoods that are growing and need adequate housing to raise their families and have economic access as well. And then of course, this came up a bunch, is home ownership. And so always keeping that in mind, that it is an option still, it's an important opportunity to understand that it's a pipeline. It can help create and generate wealth locally for families. And it's also a way that it could prioritize seniors who are aging out and in need of adequate housing as well. When we discuss youth programming and facility space for the ground floor, a big takeaway was that the programming should be robust and versatile and dynamic and diverse. And so we heard different ways that could be seen through arts and culture, job and vocational training, summer programming and participation SYEP, as well as conflict mediation and resolution opportunities, which came up in dialogue for this particular targeted youth here. and that the memorialization itself is a tool of history and education and programming as well. So keeping that in mind as we've brought forward this evening. And then lastly, keeping in mind that the open space that comes at the site could also promote recreation and fitness and wellness. And so youth really can shape how that space can be used once developed. And then lastly, I just want to bring forward some things around non-residential amenities, in addition to arts and culture programming, which came up time and time again, and the memorialization. There were some other ideas that came forward of what the space could support. And we heard ideas ranging from a community center to a senior center to a daycare center, actually supporting students at Erasmus was something we heard, which was interesting, as well as some, neighborhood needs that are still missing, as well as such as fitness and hardware store, which came up in our dialogue. So that's kind of to give you an overview and reminder of everything we've discussed to this point, and we want to really now kind of hone in and go a little bit deeper into 2 of the topic areas you would like to discuss. And Chris, I'm going to turn to you to help navigate this breakout session.
So a few of you guys, and I want to say thank you, have made note in chat which room that you guys are interested in. Can I ask, and I apologize, I don't want to call out, but it's just, we are a small group. Ryan, Natiba, Roslyn, do you guys have any preferences? Awesome, I see Natiba, you just threw it in there for us. That's very helpful. Ryan or Roslyn, other topics that you guys are most interested in to discover? Or not discover, to dive into in more detail, I apologize. Ryan, thank you. Okay. So I want to acknowledge, and I appreciate this, that we've had every topic, every one of the rooms, there's someone who has interest in, but what's interesting is that everyone across the board has acknowledged that affordable housing is one that they want to spend time talking about in particular. So what we're going to do is we're going to, for the first breakout session, we're going to divide into the 2 topics. One will be memorialization, and the other one will go into non-residential amenities, okay? And then we're going to come back as a full group, and then we'll talk through the affordable housing. Again, for these meetings, I do want to be clear that our intention will be to reflect on, and you'll have time to look at the slides that we went through to sort of reflect on where we've landed. How do we feel about it? What are we thinking about moving forward? But then also really want us to think about what do we want to know more, and where do we want to get feedback in particular from the public as part of these public workshops. So with that, I apologize. I want to just turn to Hillary and ask, are you set to send us into the 2 breakout rooms? I see a nod. This is the trick, and thank you guys for your kindness and helping us navigate. Sorry, real time breakout room fun time.
And folks on the live stream who joined us, you'll actually be staying with me in the main room, and I believe will be memorialization. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Great. All right, so see you guys in your rooms, and thank you.
Great. Is this our room? Oh, Chris just left the room. Okay. Good evening, everyone. So you are all interested in kind of going a little bit deeper into memorialization. And so I just want to pull up the slides, if you bear with me one moment, the slides that I just shared, and I'll just let you kind of reflect on what you see and if it really resonates with you, and if you like where we've kind of landed so far in this discussion. So just one moment. Again, what you see on the screen is the vision of the memorial space that came forward in our 3rd task force meeting in particular. And so to remind you, location of the memorial to be both inside and outside, which also was brought up this evening, ensuring that this space is highly engaging and interactive, ensuring it's a sacred space that allows for reflection and honoring, as well as a place for education, including programming and prompts discussion around bringing in the site's history. So I guess I'll just kick off asking, how does this make you feel? And does this resonate with you, or is something missing here for you? And we can open up from there. I'd also invite you to think about, now knowing what you know about the site, and what potential things can come of that design, keep that as a frame for the vision of the memorial. I'll also invite you to look at some of the other things that you said regarding specifications, if that helps as well.
So one of the things that I thought about, and the space that I've been visualizing is the third example.
On the vision
of the the building. I'm thinking about the building.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
But and just that, you know, for the third example that was shared earlier, and that the memorialization is kind of to the back of the building. One of the things that I thought about is if there can be like some sort of a marker that's on that intersection that kind of lets people know, because the building is going to be there. And if it's a residential space, like if someone has no prior knowledge about that spot, I think having some sort of a marker that kind of guides people to get an understanding, like this space is kind of sacred space, if you want to think about it that way.
Do you see that being physically on the building? Is
Or
what you're saying?
Not on the, or on the, I'm thinking about the, you know, the ones that I've seen in other places where they're just like a marker that's on the corner. So it's like, yeah, it's not a plaque that's on the building, because you can even miss that, but like a marker that kind of takes up space so that you know it when you encounter it, and it kind of draws you into taking some time to see what is actually on that on that marker.
That's great. And that's great about thinking about pedestrian access as well.
Yeah.
What are some other things folks are thinking in terms of just where we've landed and what you see?
And thanks for the contributions. What I was thinking of, what Natiba said, I'm assuming Natiba, you were referring as far as an outdoor marker, correct? Outdoor marker?
Yes, an outdoor marker. Something that would catch people's eyes, like who are walking on that intersection. Like if they're on Church or on Bedford Avenue and they come across this, it kind of gives them a reason to look around and acknowledge.
So two things that come to mind would be like something on that intersection, which I think probably would catch people's attention. One would probably be like a statue, but not of a figure, but let's say of some type of tablet or something, just announcing, you know, what the site's about, you know, to catch people in the intersection, and to draw people. Another thing which I was thinking about in terms of the open space was because the site being sacred, and also not sacred, but more of generating like a meditative, you know, atmosphere, but being also having to contend with the fact that, you know, it's going to be open space, so there'll be some activity. I was wondering whether or not the memorial will be more, and I'm thinking of the third example, if the memorial would probably be more in, you know, towards the back. I don't know, you know, that's what I had. I don't know what others would think about that as far as meaning the function of being, meditative and sacred. I just want to think about that. This is something that just came to mind because if it was more closer to Bedford, I know it's a lot of foot traffic there. So I don't know. I'm just working it out in my head, but
No, that's been some great contributions, and we had heard that before, that this is an opportunity for like wayfinding too, and just different markers and elements to keep in mind, and that's getting back to interactive engagement. So that's great. Is there anything you see up here that's really not resonating with you? Or I'll also turn now to some of the insights you've given on handling of human remains moving forward. What here resonates with you, and maybe what doesn't?
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I wanted to just follow up from what Tyrone was saying, talking about something like a statue or a tablet. I was thinking of when he said that, sometimes in certain special parks and stuff like that, they do have a signage kind of thing, and it has the history and information about that area. So I was thinking maybe something in that sense, and especially now we're in 2021. So of course, maybe even something more interactive in a sense where they can click and understand hey, this is what's going on here on that side outside. And I guess, and then we'd also have something inside. And then I was also thinking about what Nati was saying. I'm sorry if I mispronounced her name. Okay, good. So I wanted, so I was thinking, even for me, from a council's standpoint, I don't know if it's possible, but even maybe that corner, even having being renamed, that the name of the cemetery, what we come up for, that spot, maybe as opposed to a marker in the street, because I think the cemetery kind of goes in the street where the cars go. Maybe a street code naming would probably be something that people would look up to and be like, hey, Bedford and Church is also called whatever the name that we've decided that it's supposed to be called, of the memorial or the area. Just an idea.
That's a great idea. I wanted to also, we have about 5 minutes left. Something that I'm hoping to capture from you all as you kind of look through these slides, and what we've really come away with from the dialogue so far, is really thinking about the public workshops and thinking about the community, who are also going to be thinking about and responding to some of the ideas you've given forth, and giving their own ideas as well. And so just kind of looking at this, I'd love to just ask, in terms of how this resonates with you, should the public, is this what should the public look at these slides, and what are some considerations you have on some questions they may really want to, and some contributions they should really give when it comes to specifically the memorialization? So this is that moment, we've done a lot here, but thinking about the public now, what should be carried forward and asked of them? Reverend, yes.
Yes, this is good stuff, and I believe that it should be shared with the public.
That's great. And then, just from your own lens, is there anything else you would want to know from the public around the memorialization outside of this?
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to hear what the public have to say about it.
On a general level of the memorial itself. That's great. Absolutely.
Some persons might not be aware.
Yeah, this is building awareness as the mechanism of doing the workshops as well, for sure. That's great. Were there any other ideas? or thoughts just to keep in mind when going to the public to talk about memorialization?
I only had one concern on the not a concern. I'm making this sound way more serious than I need to. On the last slide, the one that's after this, about the reinterment, because I don't think we really discussed this as a group,
Yeah.
but the idea of repatriation to West Africa, I think that is contingent on DNA testing if it happens. Like, I think it would be very presumptuous of us to decide like this is what happens to these remains.
Yeah.
So I would say do DNA testing. Maybe they're descendants out here that can connect to these remains. I just don't think that this is a very difficult decision to make without information.
Thank you, Natiba, for bringing that up and actually providing that linkage as well. Because when we did talk about this, they were kind of talked as two separate dialogues, what it would mean to go and send them back to Africa versus what does it mean to do DNA testing. And so for you to provide that linkage for us helps us to frame that in the dialogue as it's presented and what the feasibility is as well. So thank you. Anything else? We have time for maybe one or two more thoughts. Tyrone?
If I may, regarding the comment on the ancestral remains and the point of repatriation to West Africa, that wasn't put out necessarily to be the only idea, but just one of many. So that was somewhat of many ideas to consider, because judging from past experiences with sites, particularly sites in which you dealing with enslaved people of African ancestry, those are something which was considered, actually in some situations actually done. When you think of the Sarah Bartman, I can't remember her name, the Venus Hottentot, she was repatriated back to South Africa, after being in Europe, after what happened to her. So many things are, so that was just one of many options to consider.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tyrone. I think the good part of, well, the background of that was that we knew that she was from South Africa and could be repatriated. So I think us not knowing anything about these remains kind of makes it a little bit harder for us.
Yeah. Well, that was great. And it looks like we have the full group back. Hi, Chris.
Yeah. Hi, guys.
Sorry, we could talk for hours about this.
Snuck in the end of your discussion. Maybe what we'll do is we'll just take a moment. I'm going to ask one of the city team members just to share a little bit about what you heard, and then we'll have a group together to reflect on affordable housing before we close. Can I from my room, either Lena or Aaron, whichever one you guys want to jump in, if you don't mind sharing a few things we heard?
Why don't I'll take a crack at it and others
good.
And jump in. I think on the youth services part of the discussion, we heard about a lot of opportunities to get youth input through the youth conference, youth councils, a lot of ways to sort of get the word out and have input through the surveys, the youth survey that we'll have, the public workshops and other directions. I think we heard a more priority on a space for teens, since that's something that's lacking in the neighborhood, and really a desire to really think about who would provide services to youth in the facility, and who could provide that sort of leads to different opportunities being sort of more available. And accessible. So thinking about who that service provider would be could be something to consider. On the other non-residential amenities, we sort of heard a similar theme about local organizations like Ifatayo, like Caribbean, like the organization that runs the West Indian Day Parade, and having sort of a local organization there at the site maybe something that the community would like to see. We also talked a bit about that the area also has a lot of fitness centers already, and thinking about opportunities for the sale of fresh food with the existing landscape of supermarkets and delis in the area. And we talked a little bit about how to frame for the public meeting as well, and thinking about places, services that people go to in other neighborhoods that they might be open to doing in this neighborhood as a possible framing for the non-residential amenities.
Thank you. Claudia, in your room, someone from the city team want to jump in and share just a few thoughts that you had heard?
Or I invite anyone to chime in from our discussion on memorialization.
Yeah, I could do that. So we spent a lot of time on wayfinding, how do we ensure that folks know what the history is of this area, whether that's a marker at the intersection, not so much a plaque, but like a marker that takes up space. We talked about like a statue, a sculpture, a tablet, maybe something interactive, and something that draws the outside to the inside, as well as the open space being highlighted as a space that's sacred, has a meditative atmosphere. And then, potentially with the council members' presence and the borough president's presence, is there an opportunity to do like a street co-naming for the burial ground or the task force process? And then we spent some time talking about, how do you build awareness about the history and what is happening on the site, and then this idea of repatriation being connected specifically to DNA testing. It'd be presumptuous of us to just assume. So we want to make sure that there's enough data to connect those pieces there. Did I miss anything?
That was perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. So what we're going to do now is do the same process, but as the full group, everyone expressed interest in talking in more detail about the affordable housing lens. So I want us to take a moment to look back and think a little bit about the different themes that Claudia walked through, but that we've heard as kind of resonating to the top. So we heard a little bit around, the development needs to fill the gaps of the neighborhood. They need to be supporting rent burden household, supporting families, supporting homeless population, and promoting home ownership. I'm going to go to the next slide that has a little more detail. I want you to take a minute just to look through these and then share with us, how do you feel about where we've landed? And we are a full group, so feel free to jump in. Tyrone, I see your hand up already, but that might have been from
that was.
Oh, okay. I was like, but you're welcome to jump in. So as you look at this, is there anything for you guys that's coming to the top as potentially really important, or something that is helping you say, okay, I'm okay with us, maybe it's maybe not resonating with me as well at this moment, and maybe why?
I mean, I keep saying for me, the priorities in this has to be affordable to whom, and that that the affordable units are built for families. That those would be my priorities in the affordability. Not a lot of studios, which is what we're seeing happening.
Thank you. Other thoughts as you look at these, where we landed in previous discussions?
Just a question about how much impact we have on things like homeless populations, whether that's, getting placed into permanent housing from shelters or temporary housing, is something that could be, do we have the wherewithal in this RFP, or, what's the impact we can have on that other than being aspirational? And then I think the same as, oh, and then as far as, I agree with what Robin said, except for to the extent that studio apartments are often senior housing. And Tyrone might be able to answer this if nobody else can, but I don't know. I think that there's sort of different development or different application processes for just affordable housing versus senior housing. And so again, do we have the agency to have that particular mix?
So I'm going to turn to HPD, but I do believe that as part of the recommendation that if it is indicated that the homeless population is a community that you'd like to bring to the forefront as a priority, there is a program that the building can have a larger portion be set aside for that that community. Is that right, HPD? There's a program that can be focused on that, if that's a priority. Josh, we can't hear you. Sorry, I can see you chatting.
Apologies. So I can clarify both the questions. First, in terms of the homeless populations, all of our programs except for home ownership include a set aside for homeless people experiencing homelessness, and that percentage can change depending on how much the community wants to prioritize it. It could be, I believe the minimum would be 15% or so of the units, but it could be all the way up to, if I'm correct, 60% if it's a supportive housing building. And it can be in between too. An important distinction is if the community and the task force wants to prioritize units with supportive services for formerly homeless. I think that's important right there. In terms of the question about seniors and if it's a different application process or not, for regular rental buildings, anyone can apply, right? So just because it's not a senior housing project doesn't mean that seniors aren't eligible. They would be just as eligible as anyone else. The opposite would not apply, meaning if you're having a senior housing building, you can't accommodate families, and it would be, in that sense, it's restrictive and would only be for seniors. Does that kind of get the answer?
But then could you give seniors priority in the lottery?
Yeah, they can.
Okay.
If we give seniors priority in a lottery for a multi,
or just regular affordable housing.
For regular?
Yeah.
So we wouldn't, not that I'm aware of. There could be, I have to think about it a little bit. It's complicated. I mean, there might be some small exceptions where they're using, a financing tool that is specifically for seniors. But of course, as you said, it would usually be the smaller units, right? Because seniors usually are smaller households. So it'd be mostly studios and one bedrooms. Even if it was in a multi-family building, they'd probably be applying to those and probably lower income as well, given that most seniors are on fixed incomes.
Then I would just like to add, when we think about homeless populations, just some basic information about our district. We are about to house one men's homeless shelter, and on the border, just like this is on the border of 17, on the border of 12, we have another men's shelter. We were scheduled to receive a family shelter down by Brooklyn College, and that is getting some political pushback and might not come to fruition. So I don't know if that means we should be thinking more about set-asides for formerly homeless people who are men because we host men's shelters, or for families because we're not getting one. But I think that should go into the consideration of, by homeless population, do we mean men, women, or families?
I do just want to jump in and clarify. What we're talking about here is units reserved for families in shelters or that are experiencing homelessness. It's not a shelter population. So those are two different things. Is permanent housing, and there would be supportive services. But so you're basically taking people and mostly referred by Department of Social Services, as well as by HPD, who are experiencing homelessness and putting them in permanent housing that also includes some supportive services just to help them transition. But it's not a shelter, which tends to be a population that comes in and out, and we don't specify whether those units would be men, family. If anything, we make sure that whatever range of units there are in terms of unit sizes, from studio to 3 bedrooms, whatever it is made available to the homeless as well as to the general population.
Okay, that's very illuminating. Thanks.
Thank you. Are other things coming to mind when you look at this? Tyrone, jump in.
Yeah, a couple of things. This would address what Josh was saying, also probably to help elucidate Sean's question. Like, because on Housing Connect, I have seen just general developments which actually give preferences to seniors, even though they weren't necessarily earmarked as senior housing. So I believe that is possible. And also regarding the homelessness, certain affordable housing developments from Housing Connect, they usually have a relationship with Department of Social Services, where they're the ones actually screen, actually provide the placement to that unit, to the unit. So just to let everyone know, it's not going to be like some of the street homeless that you see. Is normally people working within, we'll have a case manager, working, either in a shelter or some type of housing, who they're working with, who usually place in these type of developments. So I just want to point that out.
That's helpful. Thank you. One thing that I think we want to think about is that we will be having a similar conversation, as we've mentioned, with the public in the public workshops. And just to be conscious, what we have here is great. There's lots of different information, but as a group, we need to figure out, where do we prioritize? Because I apologize to say this, but I don't believe there is one building that will solve and support everyone on this list at this moment. And I don't mean that it's just the truth of the context. And I'm curious, what are the questions or what are the things that you hope that we uncover as part of our discussions with the public that might help us to prioritize the populations for this potential future development? Are there particular things going through your head or particular questions that you hope we ask to help us narrow and have better clarity of the priority populations? So I will share one, and then I'm going to turn to you guys. One of the big questions we've heard from your group, the interest in home ownership, right? And the interest that we are the thing we're interested in understanding from the public, excuse me, that was long-winded, is there the similar large interest for home ownership amongst the public? Because again, that's a different type of building, different types of opportunities. Are there other kind of questions or insights you hope that we capture that help us to narrow?
So I think for me, the information that needs to be captured it feels like it's very statistical, which I feel like y'all have, right? Y'all have explored that already a bit. So I can't really think of anything else other than like what the statistical needs are that have been uncovered for this neighborhood.
I think that's helpful for us to keep in mind as we carry forward. How do we use some of that data as a way to foster that discussion? And also use it when we look back at what we've heard and what the data is telling us. Sean, do you have something you want to add?
Well, just, when we look at the percentage of severely rent burdened and severely overcrowded households in the district already, I like the idea of this development, both assisting the people who move into it and then also releasing some burden from those who are already here. And again, I don't know the extent to which we would have agency over that, but sort of balancing the current needs with the additional needs that this would address. As far as the conversation about home ownership, I'm deeply interested in that. And I don't know what I I can't tell you, I have no way of taking a pulse because it hasn't happened. It would be really a brand new conversation for my community, insofar as I've been involved in it for the past 20 years.
That's insightful. Thank you. Rosalind, I see, do you have something you want to add?
I think I want to echo what Robin said earlier. The most important thing, like, for me, is the affordability. Like, what would be the, the income that you guys, that they would be looking for, who would qualify for it? Because there's some people that, although they maybe it's a one parent household, or even their income is, even if they put their income together, it's still not that high. So making sure that it covers those people who don't have such a high income as well. And then also what the cost of the rent is, because even though we're saying affordable, but what does this affordable rent price value really mean? Like, is it really affordable for the people in the community?
Right.
And what was the other thing? Also, seeing like, will it be in the application process, will we be prioritizing like people in the district who live within the district? Will they be prioritized first? Of course, I know the application is open to everyone all over New York City, but to make sure that the people that are within the district definitely gets hopefully a nice chunk of it, because it's in their area and they're needing that space. And then again, same thing like Sean said, like, I've moved into the neighborhood like since I was like 5 years old. So to me, hearing about this whole home ownership stuff, that is a big deal. And I think even talking, not even from myself, even my neighbors and stuff like that, that'll be something that a lot of people, I think, would be excited to be able to do. It's also empowering to let them know, like, hey, we can do this. And even for their children too, to see like, okay, let's see what else we can do and be able to own this space. So I think that's a great idea.
Wonderful. I want to ask if there's any other, before we wrap this up, is there anything else that we should keep in mind as part of the affordable housing discussion that we have as part of the, Reverend Hamblin, jump in.
Yeah, I'm listening, but there's a part of me, and I really appreciate all of this, and I think someone else might have alluded to it. Last time we met, I spoke about affordable housing / low income, and it seems already the city already has a definition of what is low income or affordable. And there are affordable houses around here or apartments, but affordable to whom? And so that needs to be really ironed out, fleshed out some more, because then we might end up fooling the people. So there's something about that word that continues to nag me. I'm not too comfortable with it.
I think that's a very helpful thing as we talk through and think about the planning for those workshops, and how do we uncover with the public what the definition of affordable, as you're saying, and I think Robin mentioned that and others as well, as like the term. And so who does that mean in this community? What is affordable to this community, and how do we potentially carry that forward in our discussion? So thank you. I appreciate you guys share that.
I am a big proponent of home ownership. The whole idea of using home ownership in this area, not everyone can live in a single family or detached. And as it is, how can we create where persons can use these dwellings to create wealth for themselves and their family generations to come? The reality is African enslaved people were buried there. When this country became independent, the slaves were promised a mule and help me someone, an acre of land. They never got it. So, these are things to consider, I guess.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the time that and it's helpful for us as we think about what's coming up in this process. And so with that, I'm just going to take a minute to kind of outline a little bit about the community engagement process, what's coming up. Again, provide some opportunity, hopefully you guys be part of it, and then we're going to close where we are for today. So I apologize, jumping forward to the next slide. So I want us to take a minute to remind ourselves of the intention of the public engagement. And I really appreciate that in all discussions that I've heard is there's a lot of interest in making sure that we capture the voices of the public in the final recommendations. And so that's the intention. So all of the different recommendations that we will be building, we are going to be looking for input from the public to help us move those forward. So both memorialization, housing, and I think one thing to keep in mind is there will also be a component to talk about how do you continue the descendant community research moving forward. So as we think about that, firstly, I want to say thank you. I already know, I apologize, there's a dog outside, but we're just going to keep moving forward. Firstly, thank you. You guys have all already started the community engagement process, and that's a big help to us as we move forward. And it's a big help to make sure that we capture the community voice. I want to let you guys know that you're going to be receiving a new package of resources from us probably near the end of next week. And what's going to be included in that package will be translated materials. So the flyers in Spanish and Creole. We will also have the questionnaire will be launched at this point. So the questionnaire, it will also be translated. So what will happen is it's an online document. We do have paper, but the online one, for example, is the easy one to explain. You come on, you're going to be asked which language you'd like to fill it out in, and then people can fill it out in the language of their choice. As part of that as well, there is a student survey. So we are asking, youth. We are asking youth particular questions that help us understand their point of view. We're asking questions about memorialization and youth programming, but really trying to focus about some of their interests. We will also have paper versions of those, so we'll be able to share them with you. So if that is helpful for you to print those, we can coordinate with you in regards to figuring out how to pick those up and make sure they get included. I want to take a pause though. I want to ask you guys, how is outreach going? And is there any other materials that you guys need that we haven't thought of? And you can also keep that in mind. You all have our email address. You can email me and Hillary and so on. But I'm just curious, have you been getting any feedback? Has it been, and I know, Sean, you talked about sharing this amongst your youth today, but just curious, how is the process going to start talking about this amongst your community members and peers?
One of the things we heard back from last night, because HPD was there to present to my board, and actually it was through the Community Environment Committee, but there was a lot of interest. There were a lot of questions. We put the link to your website from our webpage, and so hopefully that's going to generate more, and then and we'll push out the youth survey. But we are hearing a lot, the refrain seems to be open space. And for a long time, this was a site that was considered to be just open space. So so that's still echoing.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful.
Well, I have not shared too much with the wider congregation, but I did share with the vestry. The vestry is the managing trustees of the parish. Some members, they weren't aware of the open space, what it was. And so they're very interested. And so I plan, and it was my first meeting. It's a lot to, and so going forward, I will be sharing more.
Great.
The congregation.
Great. Well, thank you guys. I just, again, really want to acknowledge that we really appreciate the work that you're doing in getting this out to the community. We will be doing the same and really trying to ensure that one of the things we heard right off the bat from all of you is how do we make sure that this isn't something that somebody says, wait, I didn't hear about this. So how can we get it out to folks? And I really want to encourage that we have about a month before the next, little less than a month, 3 weeks before the first session. So if there's something we can do to support you in addition to the package and the materials we send, I want to encourage you to reach out to us so that we can make sure it gets in front of people if they're interested. So with that, I want us to just talk a little bit about the upcoming public workshops, right? So the first workshop that will be happening will be on Wednesday, May 5th. It's at the same time as this meeting. And we will be focusing on memorialization, honoring of the site history, and so forth. And then the second one is on Saturday, May 22nd, which will dive into more details around affordable housing. There will be sessions before, and I apologize, we haven't finalized the dates and time, but there will be planning sessions before that for interested members of the task force who want to hear how the planning is going or potentially play a role in the upcoming public meetings. We will share those dates and invitations to all of you so that if you're interested to come and listen, you're welcome to, but they will not be, I just want to be clear, they're not required. But with that, I do want to ask a little bit about your interest in being involved in supporting the public workshops. So we've internally talked about what are the different roles and where are the different places that the task force can play a crucial role. So it can be in supporting and reviewing the agendas. It can be attending the workshops, one or both. It could be taking notes. It could also be helping us flyer the neighborhood. We are going to be sending these as part of the closing survey, but I also, if you are interested now, right off the bat, and you're like, hey, I know what I want to do and I think I can commit to this, I want to encourage you to throw it into the chat. This just helps us follow up with you and support that process. But again, we would love the more that you guys can be involved, the more we are going to support that. But that's really on you guys to kind of determine what makes sense. So with that, I want to talk a little quickly about next steps, and then I'm really proud of us. We are going to end on time. But regarding next steps, firstly, as always, we will send our post-workshop survey. I apologize. So if you have additional questions about what DCP presented or about what's happening at the public workshops, and more importantly, if you know what your role and what you'd like to do and be involved, I would encourage you to fill that survey out. As always, we will fill out the notes or share with you notes and other materials in regards to preparation for the next workshop. Please keep your eyes peeled for later next week when that big outreach packet comes to you, so that, again, that outreach pack will be more comprehensive, it will have more translations, and hopefully it will be helpful for you as you continue the process of sharing it out. Lastly, our next official, and this feels far away, but it's just where we are, our next workshop together as an official task force one is going to be on Wednesday, June 16th. And why, just to be clear, why it's so far away is that we are using the next time to capture that information from the public workshops and surveys, questionnaire. And then we're going to come together on the 16th to kind of review what we've heard and through a participatory decision-making, kind of finalize some of those RFP recommendations. With that, if anyone has any additional comments, you are very much welcome to stay and be part of things with us. But I really want to say thank you. You guys have shared lots of really great insights with us today, in both considering the scenario, the DCP information, and also what's to come for the public workshops. Thank you again, everyone. Tyrone or Rosalind, is there anything we can support you guys with?
Yeah, I just some clarity. So the members of the task force is not mandatory for us to attend the public focus meetings. Am I misinterpreting it? I just want clarity on that.
EDC, do you guys have a thought on that? That it's highly recommended, I think, is the way that we'd like to frame that.
Okay, okay.
Versus the word required.
Okay, highly recommended. Okay, got you. Okay.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, I think that people in the community will see members of the task force and will see that continuity and, be more likely to show up if they know someone there already. And so it'd be great if task force members could attend.
Okay. Right. Very well. All right. Not a problem. Yeah. Because I'm curious as to see what the response is, and how things unfold and what people, what will come up. So I'm very curious. So
us too.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You have a good one.
Wonderful. All right, with that, we're going to close our live stream, Claudia, and we will end our